fair. Let's move on over to the next team that also made the playoffs within their division last year, and that was the Cleveland Browns. They were 11-6. Did lose a couple of pieces, of course, starting with quarterback Joe Flacco, who was very very good. I feel like it's an understatement, but filled in greatly for them when Deshaun Watson went down and basically just came off the couch, if I remember right. Their offense kind of took off for a bit there. Also lost running back Kareem Hunt, who's kind of been a staple as their extra back. And then offensive lineman Jaron Christensen, who soaked up a lot of snaps because both their tackles were down last year. So we'll see if that hurts them. And then on defense, lost defensive lineman Jordan Elliott, and then linebackers Anthony Walker Jr. and Sione Takitaki. And then addition-wise, brought in quarterback Jameis Winston. So we know he'll be hyping up their huddle, the pregame speeches and such. We'll see if they'll be eating W's with him in Cleveland. And then also brought in wide receiver Jerry Jeudy as well. And then on defense, grabbed defensive tackle Quentin Jefferson, and then linebackers Jordan Hicks and Devin Bush. And then still dealing with the Deshaun Watson trade they didn't have a first round pick. But in the draft, in the second round, they went defensive tackle Mike Hall Jr. out of Ohio State. And then they addressed the offensive line with guard Zach Zinter out of Michigan in the third round. So basically, it's another year, John. It feels like we're kind of where we were last year, but now there's a little bit more negativity in regards to, or maybe doubt in regards to, okay, can Deshaun Watson be that guy for the Browns again? We know he was dealing with that shoulder injury last year, but this really feels like it has to be the year for him in the offense. But what are your thoughts on the Browns?
I like what they did in the offseason. It's nothing crazy. It's not like they had a huge, major addition, but I like some of the pieces they brought in specifically on the defensive end. My worry when I saw they lost Takitaki and Anthony Walker Jr. was, okay, obviously they've got a stud in Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, but does that affect the rest of their linebacker depth? And I really like the additions of Devin Bush and specifically Jordan Hicks, because he's been a great veteran around the league for a long time and has been a very solid defender. And I think that those two guys are able to sort of help replace the losses of the other two linebackers and can help be the complete linebacker core, helping kind of elevate once again Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah to be the best linebacker that he can be, because we saw how good he was last season, finally kind of coming into his own when it comes to specifically pass coverage, being able to cover tight ends, running backs, and obviously help out in the run game too. So ultimately, I think the big question mark for this team is going to be health, and then, like you said, Deshaun Watson. Because if they're healthy, I'm looking at guys like Greg Newsome or Dalvin Tomlinson, who are currently dealing with injuries. I think Denzel Ward is dealing with an injury right now as well. That's not super, pressing, but it's there. If this defense is healthy, I think they're still going to be one of the top defenses in the league. When you have a guy like Myles Garrett, Zadarius Smith on the other side, who's still looking productive, like we just talked about with Owusu-Koramoah, a really good linebacker, and then add in that secondary, you've got Denzel Ward, who's one of the top 10 corners in the league. You've got Greg Newsome, who was really solid for them last season. You've got Juan Thornhill at safety, who's been good. Like, they clearly have, and Grant Delpit, who's also been really good at safety. They clearly have talent on the defensive end. Like that was proven last year, because although we give a lot of credit to Joe Flacco and he was really good for them, there was also games where, he would throw a couple interceptions and things would get a little dicey, but that defense was always so dominant that they could bail them out, even despite the offensive inefficiencies, whether it be during the Joe Flacco era or during the other three quarterbacks that they had played throughout the season. Because reminder, this team played 4 quarterbacks last year and went 11-6. That's how good that defense was. So as long as the defense is healthy, I still think the Browns are going to be a really good team. Offensively, I like the addition of Jerry Jeudy. I think that it's a low-risk, potential high-reward scenario. The receiver room, they don't have a lot of depth behind Amari Cooper, quite frankly. So we saw that, they're trying the Elijah Moore experiment. He was a guy I was high on the draft, hasn't really found his footing yet. Now they're kind of doing a similar thing with Jerry Jeudy, and I think that both guys have the opportunity to try and prove themselves. The worry is if they don't, because I will say Deshaun Watson last year did not seem to have chemistry with David Njoku. Njoku did not really start going crazy until Flacco became the starting quarterback. And it seemed like for Watson specifically, it was very much that he was reliant on Amari Cooper. Which is fine because Cooper can be that guy. But if Cooper's the only guy because of a potential Jerry Jeudy or Elijah Moore just not really doing much, then I do think that Njoku's going to have to build that chemistry with Watson, and I think it will happen. But like I said, the two concerns are health and Deshaun Watson, because even on the offensive side, both of your tackles were dealing with injuries last year. I don't think that either of them have returned to practice as of right now. So that's a big concern. Nick Chubb, obviously, he's coming off the injury. Do you know, is he ready to go week 1?
I'm trying to look that up. I will confirm. I'll see their site.
Everything I've seen seems to be that we're expecting maybe Jerome Ford to continue as the starter week 1. I could be wrong there. But overall, even if Nick Chubb isn't back, I actually like the depth they have at running back. Jerome Ford last year proved that he can potentially be a starter moving forward. So, and he's a guy you like. Credit to you, by the way, because I remember you liked him when he was coming out of the draft. Then they've got Pierre Strong Jr., one of the former Patriot who they traded for last year. He's had moments. He can kind of be a change of pace guy. And then they add Donta Foreman, who we've seen been able to fill in multiple teams in the past, whether it be the Bears, whether it be the Texans, whether it be the Panthers, the various teams that he's played for. So I like the kind of stable of running backs they have behind Nick Chubb, and I think that room can definitely sustain the running identity that they've typically had, even if Nick Chubb is not fully back. And I think that's beneficial because that allows them to probably take their time with Chubb and let him kind of come back into his own. So if Chubb comes back, if the tackles are back, this offensive line is stacked. They might have, one of the top 3 offensive lines in the league, assuming health. You add in Nick Chubb, I think this team's going to be a well-oiled machine and could potentially challenge Baltimore for the division title. It just ultimately depends, once again, on how good is Deshaun Watson. Because we saw with the 4 different quarterbacks, they were able to win 11 games. If Deshaun can even be a semblance of his former self, then this team could be really, really scary, especially if he can build chemistry with Njoku and Jerry Jeudy or Elijah Moore or Cedric Tillman or David Bell or whoever, Jalen Darden. These young receivers they have can maybe, one of them can pop to kind of be the guy next to Amari Cooper. And who knows, maybe they trade for Brandon Ayuk because apparently they were in the rumor mills, being one of those teams. So I'm excited for Cleveland this year. It's just tough because they dealt with so many injuries last year and still were able to be so good. You really just hope that they can be healthy.
Yeah. My concern.
And actually, real quick, I will say too, Deshaun in the games he did play last year looked solid. He didn't look amazing. He didn't look as bad as he did the year before. So maybe, he's kind of coming back into the fold. I don't know. But we'll see because he didn't play a lot last season.
Yeah, that's obviously a big factor in terms of just trying to get back, because you got to get your reps under you. And I'm surprised they didn't play him more in the preseason, just in terms of right now as well. Like even week 1 or 2, we saw. The Chiefs and a bunch of even the 49ers of Purdy. They threw him out there as well. So I'm surprised they didn't try to get Deshaun a couple more reps as well. I know the offenses are really basic in preseason because they don't want to show anything, which is fine. But even then, you still want to go through the motions per se and get them back on track. But maybe they feel confident, and there's also hard to know how much joint practices are in that. But I do have concerns in regards to their depth. I feel like it's a common theme, but especially on defense, on that defensive line, I think that's why they grabbed Quentin Jefferson and Maurice Hurst, which is fine. Good depth at tackle, but on the edge, Zadarius Smith, as great as he's been, as awesome he's been, that he's had. There's been a couple of times where he had some serious injuries with his back or whatnot. So even if it's serious or not, outside of that, any depth behind him and Myles Garrett is kind of sketchy. And then especially those corners you mentioned, they're already kind of banged up. They were great for them last year, but especially if one of those guys is down or has a down year and whatnot, I just haven't seen much from the guys behind them to be able to step up, and especially in the situations that Newsome and Ward were put in, where oftentimes those guys are put on islands, and in that Jim Schwartz kind of aggressive defense, he loves to do that. So we'll see. Hopefully they can stay healthy, and then they could be fine. And yeah, you mentioned the safeties though, also really good as well. So I think regardless, this team will figure it out. like you said, they went through 4 different quarterbacks, lost Nick Chubb last year, lost both their tackles, and they still were able to make it to the playoffs. I believe they won their first game too, if I remember correctly. Nonetheless, I remember they were very competitive going into the season. So, hopefully they can build off that and continue marching forward and finally, meet all the expectations that we've had of them, because we know that obviously from that very rough period that they had a couple of years ago where they were constantly in the top 10 and terrible, they've had some, obviously those picks and that talent is still mostly on the team, and hopefully they can capitalize off that as well. But yeah, Deshaun Watson will be a big key if he can get back to being himself, whether it be in the pocket, out of the pocket as well, with both aspects. He just hasn't obviously been the guy that he was in Houston in terms of explosiveness. With, like I said, with his feet or his arm, but we'll see. Maybe another offseason removed from everything that occurred will help him get back on track. So we'll see if the Browns can keep that train moving that they did last year, because they, like I said, they somehow made it and were not only that very competitive throughout that later part of the season without Watson.